So I saw a comment on Facebook about a post that Clonfert Diocese made on the 5th of July. And I'll just read through this post on Facebook. People no longer attend church in the numbers they once did. While some young people and young families are active in their local parishes, most of those who attend are in the upper age bracket. Every year our pews get emptier and emptier. Financial support for parishes challenging almost everywhere. Some of our parishes now have too few practicing parishioners to be sustained into the future as life-giving faith communities in the same way as they have been in the past. Our situation is such that we have not had an ordination to the priesthood in many years. Our priests are advancing in age. Many of them are already given so much self-love service. In reality, there is only so much we can expect from any one priest. And in parentheses, renew and strengthen your people. So what struck me about this post on Facebook, and if we take a look at their statistics in the National Catholic Directory, the diocese is just two pages, very small diocese. But the diocese does have the Emmanuel House of Providence, which draws a lot of people to there. Why are we facing this crisis in Ireland of faith? And what is faith? And what is the make or break aspect of our faith that will restore it in Ireland? The make or break aspect of our faith is encountering the living Christ. Christ, the person of Christ, the actual human divine person of Christ. You can only encounter that in the church, in the Eucharist, when you experience our Lord in the Eucharist. And over the last 40 years, because I remember the 80s and 90s when I was a kid, we have not allowed Catholics to experience the Eucharist because we haven't taught it. We haven't allowed our children to experience this. If we look around, I remember in the 1980s, it was that time when religious were leaving schools because there was less and less religious. It was more run by laity. So our religion teacher in secondary school was a layperson who, for whatever reason, didn't have the formation that the others would have had. We never had prayer, never had mass, never heard a confession. 5 years, 6 years in secondary school, I don't believe we ever had confession offered to us. And this was in the 1980s. And we wonder why the faith is dying in Ireland. We wonder why men don't give themselves to this mission. If you don't understand who Christ is, what Christ is, where Christ sits in our church, then there is nothing at all that you can do in the Irish church that will renew the faith. Unless people understand who Jesus Christ is for us Catholics, the Christ of the gospel, but the Christ of the Eucharist, then there's nothing we can do to renew the faith in Ireland. And it becomes a social structure. It might survive as a social structure, as something, that will plod along for a number of years, growing smaller and smaller as funds diminish and parishes need to close. It might hobble along. But the power of Christ won't be experienced unless we renew the Eucharist. Unless the Eucharist becomes the source, so much in the center of our life, and you can experience Christ and his grace in your life. And the Catholic faith hasn't changed in the last 50 years. as regards the Eucharist, as regards confession, as regards grace. What has changed is the way we live and teach it. And so sadly in the Irish Church, we don't teach the Eucharist to our children. And it's not just the intellectual understanding of the Eucharist, it's the practical experience of the Eucharist. An experience that this is something divine, heavenly, different to any food we eat. This is the bread of the angels. This is the source, so much of the center of our faith, and how we respect and treat the Eucharist. What's not said is important as much as what is said. We must kneel to receive our Lord in the Eucharist. We must adore him. As there are a few things that Catholics adore, and one of those things is the Eucharist, because it is our God, and so we kneel to him. We don't kneel to adore a statue of Our Lady or a statue of our saint, because we don't adore those things. We do give Our Lady a different place in our worship, but the Eucharist is the source, so much, and center of our Catholic faith. And we need to return to direct our church towards that Eucharist, so that people understand. Those of us who are Catholics lead by example. And sadly, our bishops and our priests are not leading with example when it comes to renewing the Eucharist. We don't. It wasn't clear to me when I was a child in the church, especially in our education system that we call Catholic, but we don't offer the Eucharist, we don't offer Mass. That's in the vast majority of Catholic schools in Ireland. We have lost the sense of the Eucharist, the sense of the sacred. And of course, if the Eucharist means nothing to you, a man will never give his life to the priesthood when he doesn't understand the Eucharist. And who will feel called to this? We have shut the doors of grace in Ireland, because with the loss of the sacred, with the loss of confession, with the loss of sanctifying grace in Catholics' lives, who will give their lives to this? If we want to renew and have vibrant faith communities and have vibrant parishes, you need to start with the Eucharist. And to any bishop and priest who thinks that they can do anything else other than this, you don't understand the power of the Eucharist then. Simple as. The only way to renew the faith in Ireland is to start with the Eucharist. And how we do that is to start teaching our children the beauty and the sacredness of this encounter with our Lord. We can kneel to the Eucharist. We can receive our Lord on the tongue, as we've done for centuries as Catholics, as was the universal practice, East and West. That moment of adoration is something that is powerful witness, because that shows that how we act as human beings in front of our God is totally different to how we act in society. And it transforms us, and it will transform our church. And it gives a message to our kids. We bring them to the Eucharist. They may not understand everything as kids, but they'll understand it in years to come. That the Eucharist was central, was precious, was important, was everything to us in the church. Many people don't understand today that the Mass is about encountering Christ in the Eucharist. That really is the essence of the Mass. We go to worship our God in the Eucharist. We go to touch him. That our interior is touched by him in the most intimate way. And so these posts about, okay, the church is dying, the church is this, the church is that, the church is the other. I mean, we have the greatest power to renew the faith. The greatest gift that God has ever given this earth to renew the faith. It is the Eucharist. It is our Lord. It is the actual presence of our Lord. If we offered that, if we renewed that, if we directed our masses to our Lord, what would change in the church? If we returned ad orientem, so that the priest went up and offered the Mass as the sacrifice of Calvary, what would change in the church? And I'm not talking going back to the old liturgy here. I'm talking about directing our worship towards who should be worshipped, which is Christ, which is our God. We don't need performances at Mass because they don't seem to be attracting anybody to the church, do they? The priest's mission is Christ. Offer him. Live, act in persona Christi in the church. Open the doors of grace. Renew confession. They go hand in hand. If you don't have an understanding of grace in your life, of sin in your life, of asking forgiveness, you won't understand the Eucharist, and the Eucharist won't transform your life. And that's why we have closed the doors of grace in the Irish Church. When the doors of grace are closed in the Irish Church, there's going to be no growth here. Simple as. We can only enter into a spiritual life, have a spiritual life, have an encounter with Christ when we understand who we are, when we understand our sin, ask for forgiveness, and receive our Lord, and grow in grace. I mean, the essentials of the Catholic faith haven't changed, but how we've lived them has been radically changed and destroyed over the last 50 years. The spending of millions and millions of euros redesigning and rejigging and changing Irish churches has done nothing for the faith at all, anywhere. Removing altar rails did absolutely nothing to renew the faith in Ireland or help the faith in Ireland. Tearing out altars didn't do anything. Removing tabernacles and putting them to the side in the church did nothing in the church in Ireland. Thousands of Eucharistic ministers that are not needed didn't do anything either. And no man is going to give his life to what we've created in the Irish Church today. And if he does give his life, many of them find themselves frustrated, alone. You know, I live in a parish here where a young priest took his life. Can you imagine? And there are many priests in Ireland that are finding the situation extremely frustrating, that they went in with a lot of illusion into their vocation and find it incredibly difficult to work with the structures that we've left in Ireland today. So, Clonfert Diocese, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go?